Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. This is going to be cool tonight because if you were a Bad News Bears fan like myself, you remember the movie so affectionately. And two members from that movie are here tonight, and they were on my show separately, did a great job. But we're going to go down memory lane, talk about the movie and all the fun stuff with it. Of course, I'm talking about David Pollock and Gary Cavagnaro. And guys, thank you for coming on again. It's a real honor.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
So I think the first thing, Gary and David, when you guys auditioned, I mean, did you two meet each other when you were auditioning, and or how did that happen? How did you two first meet?
I think we first met at the Paramount Studios on Monday morning, and when we all met, because they did cattle calls, what, like 25 cities, I think they said, and 10,000 kids, and there were several that came from the LA area, but I was the only one from Texas, and two or three from New York, New Jersey, and everyone else was from the LA area. So I was the outlier. So didn't meet anybody until we got there.
Right. And David, I know this was like your first movie, correct?
No, actually, it wasn't. I think it was my second movie. I had done a bit part in a MGM movie before that nobody ever remembers. But I at that point, I'd been a professional actor for several years, mostly doing commercials and TV shows.
Right. And now, did neither you guys were both kids, so I don't know how much you remember back then, but I mean, did you have quite a list of people auditioning for the parts that you both would end up getting, or do you? I know.
Explain what a cattle call is.
Yeah.
Because I know sometimes people audition for different parts. Like somebody may audition for one part, then he gets the other one. I mean, did you guys both, did you ever audition for any other character, or was it pretty much the character?
Well, I think I was pretty much Peg. They were looking for a Jewish-looking kid with acne that couldn't pitch. So, I was kind of typecast.
And same with me. I mean, they were looking for an overweight kid to play catcher. So, I probably the only two roles that could have been interchangeable would have been Tanner and oh gosh, Jackie.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could have flip flopped and been just fine either way. But I think the rest of us were pretty well. I think Michael had a vision of what he wanted, and he specifically went after kids for those specific roles.
Right.
Talking about Michael Ritchie, who was the director of the original movie. Who we also, I guess we met. Did you meet him at the audition?
Yeah, I did, because they came in. I did the cattle call in Dallas. And the thing was, in that, back then everything was filmed at the studios, or if they were on location, it was usually in and around LA, maybe San Francisco or New York, but that was about it. So that summer in Dallas, they were filming a movie called Logan's Run, and that was the talk of the town. I mean, it was big deal. They were filming a movie in Dallas, and so the local radio station, KVIL, Ron Chapman, Hall of Fame broadcaster, comes on the radio one morning, says, "Hey, if you kids want to be in a movie, come out to the Apparel Mart and the Kim Dawson agency and audition." Well, everybody thought they were going to audition for Logan's Run, because it was actually filming the scene where they're flying around zapping each other with jetpacks. That was filmed at the Apparel Mart in Dallas. So everybody thought that's what it was for. It was quite a shock to get there and find out it was a totally different movie. Right. So that was my cattle call. And then they asked me to come back. Who was the casting guy? Phil? Do you remember?
Oh goodness!
And the lady, the two casting people, they were the first people I met with. But then they brought Michael Ritchie Stanley Jaffe, the director and producer, came in the following day on my callback, and it was kind of a big deal, because I was the only one that came back out of all those people that were lined up, and they spent the entire day with me. Running through scenes, running in place, eating buckets of chicken, eating candy bars with wrappers on, all those things. just 2-on-1. And at the end of that, they said, "Don't call us, we'll call you." And so we left, thought nothing of it. My dad's like, "Hey, maybe you'll earn $100 this summer, on a bit part here." And that was on a Thursday. Friday, we left town to go on vacation to Austin. I was in Dallas. We went to see family in Austin, and got to Austin, played with my cousins, got back to the hotel. The light was flashing for a message, and it was my dad's office saying Paramount had called and they want me to be in LA the following Monday. And so that's how I found out. And the funny thing was they told me, "Yeah, we're going to try it out and see how it works." So we were actually filming for 4 weeks before I knew I wasn't going to get sent back home.
Right. So let me ask you both this as young kids. I mean, I'm sure somebody prepared you both to understand that there could be disappointment. You may not get certain parts. I mean, did you two really want these parts? And I mean, would you have been disappointed if you weren't casted?
Oh, there's always some disappointment. I had my fair share of disappointment, leading up to that, because I'd been doing it for a few years. And so you learn to kind of steel yourself, and, they'll call you, you don't call them. If it happens, it happens. So you try not to get yourself too invested in any particular part. Although sometimes it's like, "Oh, wow, I'm perfect for that part. I'd love to do that." But you got to push that to the back of your mind and say, "Yep, it's out of your control. It's not personal. They're looking for certain characteristics, and you may or may not have them, and you just go with it." I do remember one series of interviews I went on where it started as a cattle call, and by the third callback, it was down to me and another kid, and the other kid got it. That was tough.
Right.
So I had first right of refusal if that kid didn't do it. So, but yeah, that's one of the problems about being a child actor is you tend to have to grow up too quickly, because and it may not be such a bad thing that you learn how to deal with disappointment early on. I think that's kind of a problem with parenting today, is we kind of insulate kids from that, and if you're going to be successful in life, you really need to know how to handle disappointment.
Right.
Yeah. From my standpoint, I never expected it. It was a flyer, something I did. My mom happened to work at the Paramount, so I just went to work with her one day. So I had no expectation that I'd get it. So, it was, if I hadn't, it wouldn't have changed my life one way or another. Now, as the old hand now, I can say I've been on 4 auditions for movies, and I've gotten all 4 parts. One of which I ended up turning down after I got it, which was for Jaws 2. But I mean, I wanted to be a kid, so that, and the Jaws 2 one was the last one, and I was playing football in high school and wanted to be a normal kid, so I turned it down. So I kind of walked away from it and never really looked back.
Right. Right. Exactly. So let's talk about character and played by Walter Matthau, and of course was Buttermaker. And right off the bat, if you're watching this movie, you see that this guy, there's definitely a dark side to him. I mean, you see him drinking a beer, he's smoking a cigar. And the crazy thing is, now this is Little League, and yet this guy is getting paid to manage this team, which I always thought was a little interesting. But just comment about his character, and what did you really think about, years later now, after you've been in this movie, you watched it. How do you really assess Buttermaker?
Well, I don't know about Gary, but it turned out Walter Matthau was really good at working with kids, and there was a genuine chemistry between us and him, and it allowed us to relax and ad lib occasionally and have fun with him, and I think that's what made the movie what it was, and you could see when we did the second and third movies, that chemistry was getting lost.
Yeah, it didn't hurt that Charlie, his son Charlie was the same age we were, so
right,
he was used to dealing with kids our age. He had one. Charlie was actually the one who said, hey, Tanner, what did he say? He was the one.
Does he take a piss for you too?
Yeah, or something like that. He was the athletic player that said that to him. But, I think that whole story, looking back at it, the whole story was much of, and the character of Buttermaker, it really was as much a story about him as it was us. And the change that a bunch of kids made in the life of this disgruntled old ball player. We changed his life as much as he changed ours, and that's kind of the whole story behind it. So he was a dark character going in, and during the course of the movie, he saw that darkness in himself, and he pulled himself out of it, and was a different man at the end of the movie. So, Michael Ritchie has had a knack for telling stories in his movies. He was spectacular, and that's what makes this, I think, a classic. You have other sports movies, but they're all about the kid. Other kids' sports movies, but they're all about, like Sandlot and Mighty Ducks. They're all about the kids. Very few of them really dwell on the coach. I guess maybe Mighty Ducks does, but it was a story about him too. So,
and I think what was good about Matthau was, think about this: he had already been a well-established actor, Oscar winner, everything you can think of, been in so many movies. And a lot of times people don't want to be in kids' movies when they've gotten these different types of parts and they're big into Hollywood and stuff like that. So the fact that he took on this role says a lot about him as a person as well, because though the movie was a success, nobody could have predicted that when they were coming out with that movie. So it says a lot about Matthau that he was willing to take a chance and take this role.
Well, I think one credit there is Bill Lancaster, who wrote the script.
Yeah.
Burt Lancaster's son. He actually won the only award that the film got, was the Writers Guild Award for Best Original Screenplay. And he wrote it from his experience playing Little League as a kid. And I remember when I got that script and read it through, it was like, wow, this is impressive. So I think it was, Bill Lancaster's writing that clinched it, I'm sure, for Michael Ritchie and probably for Walter Matthau too.
So I've told the story a couple times. I developed a pretty close relationship with Walter during the film. I think a lot of us did. I was kind of the big kid that nobody understood really, and he kind of took pity on me. But I went to lunch with he and Jack Lemmon one day down to Love's Barbecue. Remember Love's?
Yeah.
And they were talking, and at some point in the conversation, he made comment that Burt, who was a good friend of his, Burt Lancaster, who was a good friend of his, had actually suggested and said that he would be perfect for this part. And so I think, that all ties together. That generation of actors, Burt Lancaster, Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, they were different than actors today. I mean, I think for the most part, they couldn't believe their good fortune. They were all old vaudeville actors and had struggled mightily in their younger days, and here they were making big money on doing things that they never thought they'd be where they were, and they stayed a very close knit, tight group. And so it was nothing for one of them to suggest something to one to the other. And as far as a part that they thought they could do, I mean, there's a story about John Wayne telling who was in Cast a Giant Shadow, telling God, I just drew a total blank, but telling the guy, the main character in Cast a Giant Shadow, that he needed to play that part. He owed it to himself to play that part, and that's kind of the communication they had as a group of actors back then. And so I think a lot of it, a good portion of that, came from the fact that Burt Lancaster had suggested it to him as to why he was willing to do it.
Right.
Because he is just coming off a heart attack too, about 18 months earlier. So he was just getting back in the swing of things.
Right. And I'll tell you, the writing was phenomenal. And the story, he told such a good story because when you think about this, you hear the term bad news bears, but you don't. I think what's real neat is how they became the bad news bears. And what really happened was they were kids who never really played baseball and they were put into a very competitive league. They probably shouldn't have been in that league, but I think it was Councilman Whitewood. He wanted his son in a, tougher league. So basically, that's why they were the bad news bears, because none of them knew how to play baseball. And the other thing I liked, you guys tell me if you agree or not, we talk about Buttermaker and he comes across as not caring about these kids in the beginning. But when you watch this whole movie, the only one who really cared, the only adult that had the best interests of the kids was Buttermaker, because, the lady Cleveland, she had an agenda. Roy Turner had an agenda. It seemed like to me that Buttermaker was the one guy who just wanted to see these kids get better.
I agree.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it kind of snuck up on him. If you watch the movie at first, it was all about the money. Yeah. That's all it cared about, and it just kind of snuck up on him. We grew on him.
Right, and I mean, it was David. I always laugh at your character in the beginning too, because I think you're the first kid whose name he reads or whatever, maybe the second kid, and you say to him, "Could I be pitcher?" And he says, "Sure." Like, he's never seen you throw a ball ever, but he agrees to let you be a pitcher. And you really played that part so well, David, because I know they wanted you to kind of play this clumsy kid who, was a little shy, but he wasn't afraid to speak up when he needed to. But you really played that part of Rudi Stein to perfection. And, I know, Gary, you weren't in the second movie, but I always laugh, David, how you played Rudi in the second movie as well. Because, I mean, there's the one scene where Rudy's laying on the bench while they're all practicing. So, I mean, you always that character to me was always the type of character that every baseball team needs, that type of person, a kid who he cares, but he doesn't care as much as he should. And that's okay because he's a little kid. So I always felt like you gave so much to that character, even though I didn't particularly like the Bad News Bears when they went to Japan. I just thought they ruined the movie by then. You still played Rudi Stein to perfection.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, and as you said, I wasn't on the second and third films, but I think David hit on it earlier. The loss of Walter and his connection with us as kids, and the following movies, it was very evident. They were much more contrived, and it took some effort to believe them. Whereas I think the original one was very believable from the beginning.
Right. And I was always disappointed that Mathau wasn't in the second one, because you would have wanted to see him win with that team. And not that Bill Devane did a bad job, because I really liked the storyline that Bill had with Jackie. I thought that father-son thing was tremendous. But I just felt like when it comes to a coaching sense, you needed Buttermaker for that next run.
Yeah, and by the time we got to Japan, they really had run the franchise as far as it would go. We had no chemistry with Tony Curtis, and it just was not a happy set, and it showed. Interestingly, we were on contract at that point for a fourth movie, and I know they were negotiating. I think the plan was to bring Walter back at that point, and do Bad News Bears Go to Cuba, which would have been fun. And they also were going to try and see if they could get Fidel Castro to be the coach of the Cuban team. And that would have been fun if we did that, but I can't blame them for not continuing it past Japan.
Well, David, the thing is too, you insult the audience, because I didn't have a problem with the Bad News Bears going to Japan. I thought that would have been really cool, because baseball is so big in Japan, and I really felt like they could have capitalized on having a great movie like that, and it would have done so well. But the writing was terrible. Now, one thing that I didn't like, well, there were a lot of things, but if you watch Bad News Bears in Breaking Training, Armad has two older brothers. There's no little brother ever. And then the next movie comes out, I think a year or two later, and he's got like a 5 or 6 year old brother. Well, where was that brother in the second movie? You never see him. So right away, you're telling the audience, oh, we just decided we needed another character, so we gave him a brother that, you know, there was no explanation of where he came, you know, how he got there and stuff.
One neat thing about the Japan shoot, and we did that in 1977, the original Bad News Bears was still playing in theaters.
Yeah.
And we got Sunday off when we were on location. And so a small group of us thought it would be cool to, you know, go and sneak into a theater and see what we look like dubbed into Japanese. And we did this thing where we went up to the box office and pointed at our faces, then pointed at the poster, and that the guy kind of got the idea that we were the original actors and invited us in. And it was standing room only, and we kind of stood in the back of the room. We were immediately disappointed because they didn't dub us into Japanese. They just had subtitles for it. But the interesting thing was that even though they didn't understand, a lot of them wouldn't have understood the language, they understood the body language, and they were laughing at all the same scenes that, you know, American audiences would have been laughing at. So, you know, comedy is a universal language in itself.
Oh, and I work for a Japanese company. As a matter of fact, I go over to Japan 3 or 4 times a year. And everybody I meet over there, everybody in my company over there knows that I was in Bad News Bears. It's a big deal. And I'm like, guys, that was 40 years ago, you know, but it's still a big deal to them.
And the movie is still going strong, guys. I mean, it's never missed a beat. And, you know, Gary, I was going to bring up your character next, because I'll tell you what, your character from the start is just hilarious, because right away, anytime Buttermaker said the littlest things, your character was getting bent out of shape. I mean, there was the issue with the chocolate on the ball, and you said, stop bothering about my weight. My therapist says this and that. So, like, you're going right off on Buttermaker. And I just thought that you played Engelberg so well. But what I loved about it more than anything else is, as the movie goes on, you see that Engelberg is matured and he's become more confident in himself.
Well, Mike, I have to confess, I didn't act. I mean, yeah. That was me as a kid. I mean, I had an edge to me because I was bigger than most kids. And, you know, I learned early on, you stick up for yourself because nobody else will, right? And so
right.
I didn't really, everybody goes, oh, you did so well. I was just being me. That's the way, you know, that's the way I was as a child. And to a great extent today, you know, I don't, you know, I don't suffer fools very, very well, and I don't back down very often. So that's just the way I was. I am my nature. It wasn't a lot of acting, but
right.
Yeah,
it would have been cool to have you in the second and third movies. So maybe you want to tell the story why that didn't happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we were doing Bad News Bears, I got severe bronchitis and went to the doctor, and, you know, always before I'd gone to my pediatrician that heck, he'd taken care of my mom and when she was a kid, right? I mean, and it was always, oh, it's just baby fat and all this stuff. I went to a doctor in LA and he said, hey, you better lose weight, because if you don't, you're going to be in a wheelchair by the time you're 18. You're going to be dead by the time you're 25. And this scared the bejeebers out of me. And so you can actually tell in the movie, if you look closely, there's some scenes where I'm significantly lighter than in other scenes. I lost about 35 pounds during the filming. And then when I got home, when we did the movie, I was 5 foot, 205 pounds. By the time they were going to do the sequel, I was 5'8" and weighed 155 pounds.
Wow.
And they said, well, do you want to, we'd like you to gain 50 pounds. And I said, no, not going to do it. I mean, that doctor had scared the daylights out of me. I said, no, there's no way I'm going to gain weight like that. No. And my parents said, absolutely. We support what he's saying. He's not going to do it.
Right.
And again, you know, I would have loved to have been in the movie. If they really wanted me, they could have written that into the script. But
or today they would have given you prosthetics and
yeah, really. But you know, I hate that I missed it. But from the stories I hear from David and Chris and Scott, and didn't miss much.
Right. And you know, Gary, throughout that movie, you had great chemistry with Walter. And I mean, I said this to you the last time I talked to you, but it's really true. I mean, you look back on it years later, you have to be so thankful and grateful that you got to do a movie with Walter Matthau, and you had these great scenes with him. I always felt like it was just the dialogue you two had was hilarious. He didn't ever flip out on you, but he would just occasionally say, "Shut up," So
Well, I
yeah,
mean, I did shock him around the car when he said somebody's going to pay for that window butter making or Engelberg, and it's going to be your dad. And Michael had encouraged us to ad lib, and I just said bullshit.
yeah,
And Walter just, I mean, he his jaw dropped. Michael starts cracking up. I've forgotten who the assistant director was, but he's like, "You can't say that. You can't say that." And Michael's cracking up. Said, "No, that's great.
Right.
That's great. Do it again. Do it just like that again." And Walter's like, "Did you really just say that to me?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I mean, and that Michael says that's the greatest profanity in the entire movie, which I'm like, really? I thought there was a lot of worse stuff than that. But to me, my favorite line of the whole movie is when Ahmad tries to catch the fly ball and he gets racked, and you hear somebody. I think it was Jackie in the background. They said, "Get him a stretcher," and a little voice pipes a stretcher for his balls. But I mean, these were all ad libs that Michael encouraged us to do. So we were just kids being kids out there. It was a blast. I mean, that was one of the funnest things I've ever done in my life, and even though they had a very tight structure around it and there were rules that we couldn't break, I mean, we learned pretty early on what those boundaries were, and we were given free reign within them, and it was a lot of fun.
right. Another character I really enjoyed. You would occasionally see him, stand up for himself, but he was really like, in a lot of ways, the peacemaker on the team. And that was, of course, the character Ogilvy, who was played by Alfred Lutter, I believe, or Luter. And I mean, what a funny character. I mean, he, when he's going over the stats one game and he says we hit 18 foul balls, even though a no hitter was pitched against them, I just always felt like it was amazing to me just how, like, again, the writing was so tremendous because you got this 12-year-old kid who basically he's on the team, but he's more like, Buttermaker's bench coach than he is a player. And I thought he played that role so well. Talk about him a little bit.
David?
Well, yeah, he was, Alfred just, it was so well cast. By the way, I went and looked up. It was Mike Fenton and Jane Feinberg were the casting agents in this. And
right.
they did a lot of Paramount movies back then. But Alfred, like me, had also been a professional actor up to that point, and he was known for his role in the movie Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore,
right?
Which was also a great role for him. But yeah, he played that character perfectly, and it really came across.
Yeah, and again, it wasn't really. It was typecasting. I mean, that was kind of Alfred. He was a nerdy, brainy guy, and grew up to be a nerdy, brainy guy.
Or rather wealthy, brainy, nerdy guy.
Yeah, right.
Very successful.
And I guess his parents were older. They had him later in life, and he was a little adult even back then. And so, going back to my original statement, Michael had a vision for all these kids, and he went out looking for people that fit his vision. And that's why I don't think a lot of us were. I think most of us, if not all of us, were cast for the very part that he wanted us to play from the very beginning.
Right. And then, of course, guys, Chris Barnes, who played Tanner Boyle. And I'll tell you what, he was a very controversial character because, he didn't have a filter. He said whatever was on his mind. He didn't care who he offended. But the one thing about Tanner that you did see is that Tanner did have a good heart. I mean, when Lupus is being picked on by Joey Turner and his friend, you're watching that scene and you're wondering if Tanner is really sticking up for him because he doesn't like Joey Turner or because he feels bad for Lupus. I think it was a little of both. But when he realizes that he insulted Lupus and he sees that it hurt his feelings, you could see that he felt bad about him. So even though Tanner, there were a lot of things he said that he shouldn't have said, and he could be rude and insensitive, there was definitely a kind side to him, and he was really like probably the kid on that team that wanted to win more than anybody.
Yeah, Chris was my best friend in the filming. We got to be very close, and after the film, he came and stayed with us for a few weeks, and we actually went to the. He came down 2 weeks after the movie premiered. He was here, and we went to the theater together and got mobbed. And we were kind of like of mice and men, Lenny and and George, Mutt and Jeff when we'd walk around. But Chris, and the funny thing is, I talk about that's the one exception. Chris was nothing like that character.
Right.
Yeah, that was true acting in his part.
Yeah, Chris was the nicest little Catholic boy you've ever met. His family was very religious. They had a really hard time with this movie and the behavior that he had to exhibit in it, which is why he didn't end up being in all three of them. They
Right.
after the second one, they said, we've had enough. Came from a great family. I think he had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. I think a big family, big Catholic Northeastern family, and just a sweet kid and a very nice man now. He was great.
Right. Most definitely. So let's talk a little bit about the movie here. David, I'll start with you. As you're filming this movie and you could see that there's changes being made, they're making the team better. They go out and get, 2 ringers, and one's a pitcher, one's an outfielder, and Amanda and Kelly. But I mean, as you're watching you're filming this movie and things like that. I mean, did you like where they were taking the movie? I mean, I always felt like there wasn't a bad scene in the movie. I felt like everything they did, it told a great story. Even when they got Amanda, they still didn't have enough to win, and they were close, but they hadn't got over that hump. So I just felt like from start to finish, these guys never missed the boat on this movie. It was just so well written.
Well, it was, but there was some anxiety about whether audiences would accept the ending that we eventually filmed. And I don't know if Gary remembers this. We actually filmed an alternative ending where we actually win the game, and we had to ad-lib that because it wasn't in the script. And then when they did some audience testing, they realized that no, we just need to stay true to the script because that's kind of the perfect ending for this. It's a moral victory, not an actual victory.
I think that's what made it a cult classic, because this was the first movie of its kind where you didn't win. Always before, you work hard, you do all these things, you win. It's a see what you can accomplish, right? And this was different. And I think that's what made it the cult classic it became.
Yeah, but none of us had any idea. I mean, we knew it was a solid script. I think we all thought, well, this will be a fun kids movie for the summer, and it'll be quickly forgotten. We were kind of all taken by surprise by its popularity.
Yeah, I actually saw. I was the first one to see the final thing because it premiered here in Dallas at the SMU Film Festival, and I was there with Michael and Stanley, and I remember getting home and calling Chris long distance. We lost because none of us knew which ending they were going to pick.
Right. So let me ask you both this. This is a 2-part question. 1, how long did it take to film this movie? And 2, how long would you say it took before you guys developed close relationships with one another?
Well, we were filming for 10 weeks.
Right.
Which is pretty short for a motion picture. Wouldn't see that today. We all met as a cast on the first day at a read-through. We all sat around a big table and read through the whole script. And that was kind of our introduction to each other. And we kind of gradually got to know each other, over the 10 weeks, mostly filming at the baseball field out at Mason Park in Chatsworth. And we kind of got to know some of the people hanging around too. Burt Lancaster would stop by the set, see how his son's script was going. Ryan O'Neal would come around to see his daughter, and Jack Lemmon would come and visit Walter Matthau. So we got to meet all sorts of people and develop different relationships. So it
Steve
was.
Garvey was our technical director.
Oh, that's right.
For the,
I forgot that. I remember he had such an enormous hand.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And the thing of it is too, is I think that's what you take out of it more than anything else. It's a cult classic, like you said, Gary, and it's almost 50 years. We're in year 48 of since this movie first came out. But you guys are still friends today, and I know you guys are close with Brett, Aaron. I think even you guys talk to Chris at times. So the cast has kind of stayed close with one another. And sometimes that'll happen, but a lot of times it doesn't. People do movies together and then they may never see each other again or don't keep in touch. You guys have remained friends throughout this. And I think that would probably, when you look back on it now, that's probably the most rewarding thing about the film.
Absolutely. I saw Scott and Chris down here. Did they come talk to you too, Dave, for their little documentary they're doing?
Yeah, I actually went to Scott's garage and filmed.
Yeah.
I know what's happening with that now.
Yeah, well, no, he's still working on it. But I mean, they came down here and spent the afternoon with me, and I mean, it was like we were doing this yesterday. I mean, we just picked up right where we left off, and again, when we did the 40th anniversary that we did at Moore Park.
Yeah,
we
actually put it back on the big screen again. That was
yeah.
fun. We had 5 of us there.
I mean, it was a formative time in our lives, and it was a unique shared experience that really bonded us all together. And I pick up the phone and I'll talk to Aaron or text him in on Facebook or something, and we pick up like we've just been talking to each other nonstop since the movie was on. So, I consider all the guys to be very close, dear, personal friends, and it's just a great event, and I got some great friends out of it.
Right. And David, you talked about Scott. Scott also wasn't in the second or third movie. What happened? Why was Scott was he not asked back, or did he decide to go back?
I never got that story. Did you, Gary? What was
it had something to do with, I think his mother complained about something. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there was a reason that it happened. Just like with me, there was a reason. I just don't know it, and I guess that's probably Scott's story to tell, not mine.
Right. And David, I always thought too, like another problem with the second movie is, how do you not have Amanda in that movie? I mean, she was the pitcher for the first year, and then no offense to Jimmy. Jimmy was a great actor, did tremendous on the series Soap, but I just always felt like, you rooted for him, obviously, but you didn't have like that attachment to him like you had with the other cast in the first movie. So that was a letdown for me as a fan. What were your thoughts about that?
Well, it was easy working with Bill Devane. He had some of the same instincts that Walter did in working with kids, and we did feel relaxed around him and were able to be ourselves around him. So that's why the second movie kind of worked, because we had some of that chemistry there. But you're right. I mean, it wasn't the same cast at that point. We lost Gary, we lost Scott, and I think there's only 5 of us that ended up in the Japan movie. So yeah, we were kind of dissipating as a cast and losing the chemistry all at the same time, and it all kind of was really evident by the time we did the Japan movie.
Right. Now, a scene in the movie that was tough to watch, Gary, but at the same time, again, this is why I go back to the writing and how well this movie was done, was the scene when your character, Engelberg, nearly gets hit by a pitch by Joey Turner. His father had told him to pitch high and inside and almost hits you. And then his father comes out to the mound and smacks him in front of everybody. And for the first time, which I really thought was cool, was both Engelberg and Joey were taunting each other throughout those at-bats. But you see Engelberg realizes this is a kid like me. And all that hatred that Engelberg might have had for Joey Turner went away in those, few minutes because he saw that Joey is still a kid and he couldn't believe that his father could do something like that. So talk about that scene a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was, gosh, that was really before child abuse was talked about. I mean, when we were kids, I had friends whose parents were not very nice to them and everything. I think we all did, but that was something you didn't talk about, and to have it so openly depicted on the big screen like that. I remember at the SMU Film Festival, literally people gasped. And I'm not talking just women, men too, when he hit Joey. It was just a shock. You didn't see stuff like that in the movies those days. So, I mean, this movie is groundbreaking in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I mean, it really held up a mirror to people because it was a very true depiction of Little League. There's always those parents that are reliving their youth through their children, and the ones that think their son's going to play in the big leagues and ride them forever and so forth. So, and now you have the father who's gotten so involved that he struck his child.
Right.
And really, what did Joey do? He did exactly what his dad would taught him to do.
Right.
I love the mother, the young lady who played his mother, the look she gave him. I mean, I've been married 37 years, and fortunately, I've never gotten that particular look from my wife. But I mean, it was, if looks could kill, he would have died right there on the spot. It was a shocker for everybody, and as kids, we didn't really understand it.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand why people were so shocked by it.
And if you watch that scene too, and you watch everything prior to that scene about Joey Turner, you're not liking Joey Turner because he comes across as obnoxious. He's picking on people. But when you see that one scene and then you see him, hand the ball to his father and he leaves with his mother, you see a kid that you feel sorry for, and you don't look at Joey Turner anymore, disliking him. You feel completely bad for him. So that's just the beauty of, writing, but it's also a lesson that tells adults that these are still kids. And even though they make mistakes, that doesn't mean they're bad kids. It just means they're young and they're going to make these mistakes. And he was still a kid, and he did not deserve to be treated like that.
Well, you see why Joey Turner was Joey Turner. You see why he was the way he was in that scene. And again, I think it goes to the brilliance of Michael Ritchie and the way he developed these characters.
Right. And David, it's funny because where Roy Turner never learned about the mistakes he made in, this film, Buttermaker always did. And there's the one scene that it was tough to watch again, but you see Buttermaker realize he was wrong in this instance. And it's when he tells your character, Rudi Stein, to purposely get hit with the ball. Now, Rudi did it the first time. He didn't want to get hit again. And Buttermaker said, no, take the hit. You don't have to get hit in the back, get hit in the leg or whatever. Rudi swings the bat, and Buttermaker just starts berating him. And about 5 minutes, I would say 2 minutes after he's berating him, Buttermaker realizes, you know what? I'm letting the game become bigger than these kids, and that's not right. And you see later on in the film a great moment between Rudi and Buttermaker. Rudi gets a hit, but he tries stretching it into a double. He gets thrown out. He comes back to the dugout and he's apologizing. And Buttermaker says, "What are you sorry about? That was nice hustle. Put your hand out. I like that." And I just thought that was a real magical scene between you and Walter. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, that was a fun scene to film too. The one when we got together, I think 5 of us for the TV guide shoot back in around 2000. And that was really the first time that a large group of us had gotten together. And to my surprise, the scene that everyone else was talking about was the one where Walter tells me to go and get hit by the ball for the second time, because they remembered that Walter and I couldn't get through that scene because Walter kept cracking up every time I would look up at him. And I was thinking, wow, this is one of the most famous comedic actors in the world, and he thinks I'm funny.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
I don't want it. I don't want it. It was funny.
Yeah,
You were pathetic.
and here's the ironic thing though. If you really look at it and you watch the scene, and if you know baseball, he is telling Rudi to get a hit because he doesn't have faith that Rudi could get a hit, and he wants Engelberg to bat. But why is Rudi batting ahead of Engelberg if Engelberg's the better hitter? So, it was those little things you kept. Rudi batted in between Kelly and Engelberg. So, I mean, he had to, have faith in Rudi as a hitter to have him in between those two big bats,
Well,
and ironically, the one thing I can do in baseball is I'm a pretty good batter, lousy pitcher, but
yeah.
And so, Gary, what were you saying?
No, I'm not sure that they really thought through it that deeply. It was because remember, the reason Rudi was in was they pulled out all the starters, and this is after his epiphany, and started they put in
Lupus
and Georgie and Miguel and all that, so it kind of jumbled up the lineup. But that was one of my favorite scenes because I mean the sheepish look on David's face when he's like, it hurts. I don't, and it really did. That's the funny thing. When they were throwing at my head for my scene there, and Michael's like, it's a rubber ball. It's like, it still hurts.
Yeah.
Well, and it's hard to psych yourself out too. I knew that was a rubber ball, but still purposely leaning into it, I had to fight my instincts.
Yeah. And, you talked about putting the reserves in, and you talked about Lupus. And that, again, another special scene is when Lupus makes that big catch. He robs the kid of a home run. And at that point, the Bears are down, I think, 7-3. It's looking like they're going to get beat. But nobody on the Bears team was thinking about the score. They all went out and congratulated Lupus. I love how Tanner comes all the way out there to congratulate him, and just a special scene. And that's really what they did for that movie is the kids who watched that, they gave kids something to feel good about, because what kid doesn't dream about doing that when they're playing Little League, trying to make that big catch or hit that big home run? And really, there were so many life lessons taught in that movie.
Agreed. I agree. I mean, I've said it 4 or 5 times. Michael was a master storyteller, and you see it in every movie he made. He told a story, and I know as a kid growing up, I'd be in class and we'd be reading the story, and they said, "What was the author trying to tell you?" Well, I always kept thinking he was just trying to write a story, but Michael truly was trying to get a point across in his movies, and I think he did a really good job with Bad News Bears in making the point that primarily to these helicopter parents who are reliving their youth through their children, that hey, you can take this too far. You really can take it way too far, and look at the impact it has on these kids if you do.
Right.
So
now, guys, one scene I wanted to get both your opinions on this, because there was a scene with Buttermaker and Amanda where you could just see Amanda is trying so hard for Buttermaker to stay in her life. You could tell that she looks at Buttermaker as a father, and Buttermaker is just so resistant. He's pushing her away. So I wanted to ask you both, because as a fan, I could never truly understand why Buttermaker was so resistant. What do you think the reason was that Buttermaker was trying to push her away?
Well, in the story, he had a relationship with Amanda's mother.
Right.
That relationship didn't really work out. He felt like his freedom was taken away. He just wanted to focus on drinking his beers and doing the things he likes to do, and he didn't want to get sucked back into that relationship. So that it wasn't so much his relationship with Amanda, but Amanda's mother that he was afraid of getting back into.
Right. And it was a tough scene because he basically throws the beer at her, or I think it was the beer. And he basically is so blunt to her, tells her, "Don't you understand? I don't want your company. If I did, I would have looked you up 2 years ago." So, I mean, it was you feel terrible for Amanda, but I mean, they show you that even though Buttermaker was doing things right on the field, off the field, he was still a very complicated person.
Well, I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he knew he was no good for her, or he felt he was no good for her. Let me rephrase that. He felt he was no good for her. I mean, think about it. He brought her into this not for her well-being, but to help him and solve his problems, right?
Right.
I mean, there was an ulterior motive for everything he was doing, and when she started warming up to him and making, he was not a man who felt like he could live up to expectations.
Right.
Is what it boils down to. I mean, he was afraid of. I mean, there's that fear of letting her down, and I think that's where that comes from. Hey, let's face it. He's a at that time a middle-aged, drunk, often drunk, washed-up ball player with no prospects at all.
Right.
That's how he saw himself.
Yeah. So, guys, let me ask you this: in the 10 weeks that you filmed, are there any cool stories you'd like to share? I mean, they don't have to be controversial or anything, just some fun things that you guys did as a cast that you might want to share with the people that, I'm sure you guys hung out a lot throughout that filming.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, there was a time Jack Lemmon came to the set and he and Walter took us all down to get an ice cream at 31 Flavors.
Yeah. They took me to lunch. He and Jack took me to lunch in Jack's Rolls Royce down at Love's Barbecue. I mean, I'd never been in a Rolls Royce. I barely seen one. I'm riding in a Rolls Royce, and they're talking to me like I'm an equal. I tell you, I really enjoyed Vic Morrow. He had a reputation of being a gruff person, but he was a great guy. I'll never forget. I turned 12 on the set. Do you remember what they did to me on my birthday, David?
Oh, I've forgotten that. What happened?
So they dressed me up in my "I'm Available" T-shirt, and they sent me behind the plate to reshoot the scene where I pick up the ball and throw it and fling it.
Oh, that's right.
Break Buttermaker's windshield, and so I'm kind of irritated because I thought we'd done that when I wasn't feeling good. I was just starting that bronchitis. And I bend over, I pick up the ball, I turn around to fling it, and Michael and Stanley throw lemon meringue pies in my face. and I grab one of them, and I chase him down, and I throw it and hit Stanley in the back with it. And Vic comes up to me and goes, "I really was impressed with that. You showed some balls." I'm like, wow, he thought I showed some balls. So that was kind of neat. And then Michael saw that I was having some trouble with some of the other kids early on. Because, hey, when you got a bunch of kids there together and one of them's fat and the other ones aren't, they tend to make fun sometimes. That was all gone by the end of the movie, but early on there was a problem. So he came to the set one day wearing a bright yellow T-shirt that said Gary Lee Cavagnaro Fan Club.
Right.
And he wore that 2 or 3 times during the filming of it, and that just that was neat. I mean, he understood I was having some trouble, and he did that. Went out of his way to make me feel special, and it worked. So, by and large, actors and Hollywood gets a really bad rap these days. From my experience with the generation of actors we dealt with there, they were all just class people. Walter, Burt, Jack Lemmon, Michael, Stanley. I mean, they were just good people. They really, really were.
Right. And, guys, I look at it this way. A lot of times they'll be in a bunch of different things and, they're good actors, but you guys who maybe weren't in a lot of movies, you're always going to be remembered for this one classic movie. People will still come up to you today. It's a cult following. I mean, people love it. They still talk about it. Here we are almost 50 years and it's still as popular as it was 50 years ago. So even if you guys never did another movie after this, if you had that one thing to your credit, you got to be proud of it, because to this day, that movie it still has a legacy that lives on.
Yeah, and that's something that I feel very fortunate about, because there's 160,000 actors in the Screen Actors Guild, and on any given day, 95% of us are unemployed. Now, I've maintained my SAG card over the years, thinking I might go back into it someday. But most of those actors will go through their entire careers without being in anything particularly iconic. You have to look them up on IMDb to see what they were in. So the fact that we were in something that's that memorable is unusual and special, and I feel very fortunate to have had that experience.
Agreed. Yeah, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. I mean, this was a slow year for Paramount. They filmed this movie because Burt had, back in those days, actors had contracts with studios, and Burt had been loaned to Paramount. How was it? It was Paramount loaned Burt to somebody, or Burt agreed to let Paramount loan him to somebody for a movie, and they owed Burt a favor, and that favor was paid back by agreeing to do Bill's screenplay and turn it into a movie. So when they started to make this, it was not going to be a big movie. This was just something they were doing as a favor, but there were no big movies. Yeah, very low budget. There were no big movies. When we got out there, it was almost a week after we got out there before they signed Walter and Tatum to be in the movie.
Yep,
right.
They decided to make a big push with it, and so the fact that it did as well as it did, because at one point it was the second grossing movie to Jaws, and the fact that it did that well shocked everybody.
Right. So, and I know as kids, you guys probably, I think you understood the significance of it as kids, but as you got to be adults, to realize just how popular this movie was. And think about this, when they turn the movie into a TV series and then they do a remake of the movie, that movie was pretty special, because if it's not a good movie, you're not going to see somebody try to turn it into a series or even do a remake of it. Usually when movies aren't successful like that, you don't really hear much about them again.
Yeah, I really wish they wouldn't have tried the remake.
Yeah. My middle boy was the final cut for Engelberg in the remake.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and it was funny because we go in for the cattle call. They had it at a local high school here, and they read his name and they said, "Cavagnaro, are you in relation?" He's like, "Yeah, that's my dad." And they came out and said, "Well, are you going to run through lines with him? I'm sure you know all these lines." And I'm looking at the script. And I'm like, No, I don't know these lines. If we had said stuff like this back then, they would have arrested Michael and Stanley and every adult on the film. Right. Because he was talking about pedophiles and all this other stuff. I'm like, oh my God. So I was actually kind of happy when they didn't pick my son, because that was pretty colorful dialogue on some of that.
Right.
And what gets me though is whenever I see Bad News Bears on cable or something, I'll switch to it, and it's always that one now. Very rarely is it ours anymore.
Yeah.
Really?
Which is unfortunate, but at the same time, if you go to any cable provider and you just type in Bad News Bears, they're still showing the movie to this day. I have it in the background right now. So, it's still a living legend. It really is. And I was thinking about this too. Anytime David or Gary, if they search your name on Wikipedia, it's always going to say David Pollock is a former child actor known as Rudi Stein in the Bad News Bears. Same thing with you, Gary. And that's pretty cool to have, because like David, you said this before, a lot of people do movies, they do a ton of them, but you have to go to Internet Movie Database to see what they were actually in. But when they put that movie right there, known for as Rudi Stein, that just means that, it's like anything else. Happy Days, who Ralph Malph was known for, Donnie Most was known for, Ralph Malph. You're always going to have that both next to your names, no matter whenever anybody types you in, Bad News Bears is going to be right there.
Okay, not to be morbid. Yeah, I'm 60 years old now. David's, I think you're a year or two older than me, right, Dave?
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, one of the things I always wonder is when my time comes, will I get a clip on the Academy Awards?
I doubt it.
I wonder how because they've gotten some pretty not well-known people that they've run on there for that. So I'm just like, but that's been one of my thoughts. I said maybe I'll at least get on there one more time. But that's kind of an odd wish to have, I guess. But
and Gary, not to get off topic, but that's one of the reasons award shows like that bother me, Emmys, Academy Awards, because they tend to focus on the people who are so well known to people. Well, just because maybe you and David aren't well known to this generation doesn't mean you weren't well known to the other generations. And to just like they do that a lot with a lot of actors. If they don't think you're big enough, they don't mention you. And I think that's really unfair. If somebody was a part of Hollywood and you're going to remember them when they pass, you should remember everybody. You shouldn't just remember this guy and then say, oh, okay, well, nobody knows who he is, so I'm not going to bring him up.
Yeah, what really bothered me in the memoriams section last year, I think it was, I was good friends with Nehemiah Persoff, who was a very famous character actor, was in, lots of films. He played the Papa in Yentl. He was did a lot of voiceovers for American Tail. Very, very famous guy, and he lived to be 102 years old, and he didn't make it.
Really?
Yeah, because the Academy is dealing not just with
actors,
but directors and producers, and all these other categories. So they did do a website that had the complete list. But I thought if Nikki didn't get on there, not happening for me.
Yeah, I guess we're not a chance, but oh well.
Well, guys.
Well, that time I won't care, I guess.
I can tell you this, guys. I hope that's a long, long time to come. You both look healthy, and I want to see you both around. But I can tell you this much, that for myself, and I could speak of so many fans, that we have never forgotten your characters, you guys as actors. And I mean, to me, that movie, brought back so many great memories for us as, when we were kids, and to still watch it today and still, I could watch it and never get bored of it. And that just says a lot about both of you, the other actors in the movie, and you guys are a credit to the industry. And just because maybe some people don't give it a respect you deserve, remember this, the fans do, and that's all that really matters.
Well, thank you.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for giving me a few minutes today. This was great, a lot of fun. I'm like I said, I really congratulate you both on all the success you've had in your lives, but I'm really happy that you have stayed close with one another. For me as a fan, that's always so nice to see, when guys who worked together almost 50 years ago could still be great friends. So I really applaud you both for keeping your friendship, and just keep up the great work, because you guys definitely left your mark in Hollywood, and this movie, like I said, will be a classic forever. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you, guys. And of course, that was Gary Cavagnaro and David Pollock for In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.